The doll arrived on a rainy October evening, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a frayed string. It was left on the porch of the old Victorian house where Clara lived with her father, a reclusive clockmaker who rarely spoke and spent his days tinkering with broken timepieces in the basement. Clara, a quiet girl of 12, had no friends to speak of, and her only companions were the books she borrowed from the library and the occasional stray cat that wandered into the yard. The package had no return address, no note, no explanation. Just her name scrawled in spidery handwriting across the top. Clara. She carried it inside, her fingers trembling with a mix of curiosity and unease. The doll was heavy, its weight unsettling as she peeled away the paper. When she finally saw it, she gasped. It was beautiful. The doll was about 2 feet tall, with porcelain skin that glowed faintly in the dim light of the hallway. Its hair was a cascade of golden curls, its eyes a piercing shade of blue that seemed to follow her as she moved. It wore a delicate lace dress, yellowed with age, and tiny leather boots that clicked softly when she set it down on the table. But there was something off. The doll's smile was too wide. Its lips curled into a grin that bordered on predatory. Its eyes, though stunning, held a glint of something dark, something alive. Clara told herself it was just her imagination, but as the days passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was watching her. Clara placed the doll on the shelf above her bed, where it sat motionless, its glassy eyes staring out into the room. That night, she woke to the sound of soft footsteps. She sat up, her heart pounding, and looked around the room. The doll was gone. Panic surged through her as she scanned the shadows, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Then she saw it. The doll was standing at the foot of her bed, its head tilted slightly to the side, its grin wider than before. Clara froze, her mind racing. She must have been dreaming. She had to be. But when she blinked, the doll was back on the shelf, exactly where she had left it. The next morning, Clara tried to convince herself it had been a nightmare. But as the days went by, strange things began to happen. She would hear whispers in the dead of night, faint and unintelligible, coming from the direction of the doll. Objects in her room would move on their own. A hairbrush on the dresser, a book on the nightstand. Once, she woke to find the doll sitting on her chest, its face inches from hers, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. She screamed, throwing it across the room. It landed with a soft thud, its head twisted at an unnatural angle. But when she looked again, it was back on the shelf, perfectly intact. Her father noticed the changes in her, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she jumped at every sound. But when she tried to tell him about the doll, he dismissed it as childish nonsense. "It's just a toy, Clara," he said, not looking up from his workbench. "Don't let your imagination run wild." But Clara knew better. Desperate for answers, Clara began to research the doll. She spent hours at the library, poring over old newspapers and dusty archives. Finally, she found something. In 1923, a girl named Eleanor Hargrove had lived in Clara's house. Eleanor was an only child, much like Clara, and she had been given a doll for her 12th birthday. The doll was a gift from her grandmother, who had brought it back from Europe. According to the article, Eleanor had become obsessed with the doll, carrying it everywhere and refusing to part with it. Then one night she disappeared. The doll was found in her room, sitting on her bed, its dress stained with blood. Eleanor's body was never recovered. Clara's hand shook as she read the article. She felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. The doll in the grainy photograph was the same one sitting on her shelf. That night, Clara decided to destroy the doll. She waited until her father was asleep, then crept into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. The doll was waiting for her. It sat on the edge of her bed, its head tilted, its grin stretching impossibly wide. Clara hesitated, her grip tightening on the knife. "You can't get rid of me," the doll whispered, its voice high-pitched and mocking. "I've been here before, and I'll be here long after you're gone." Clara lunged, plunging the knife into the doll's chest. But instead of porcelain, the blade sank into something soft and wet. Dark liquid oozed from the wound, staining the doll's dress and pooling on the floor. The doll laughed, a sound that sent chills down Clara's spine. "You're mine now," it said, its voice echoing in her mind. Clara dropped the knife and stumbled back, her vision blurring. She felt a cold presence seep into her, filling her veins like ice. Her body convulsed and she fell to the floor, her limbs twisting and jerking uncontrollably. When she woke, the doll was gone. Days passed, and Clara's father grew increasingly worried. His daughter was no longer the quiet, bookish girl he knew. She was distant, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She spent hours locked in her room, whispering to someone, or something he couldn't see. One night he heard her laughing, a sound so unnatural it made his blood run cold. He burst into her room, only to find her sitting on the floor, surrounded by broken mirrors. Her reflection was gone. "Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling. She turned to him, her smile too wide, her eyes too bright. "I'm not Clara," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of the doll's. "I'm Eleanor." Clara's father tried to save her, calling in priests and psychics, but nothing worked. The doll had taken hold, and Clara was gone. One morning, he woke to find her room empty. The doll sat on her bed, its dress clean and pristine, its grin wider than ever. And on the floor, written in blood, were two words: "Thank you." Years later, a new family moved into the house. They had a daughter, a quiet girl of 12 who loved books and stray cats. On her birthday, a package arrived on the porch. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with a frayed string. And on the top, in spidery handwriting, was her name.